The forgotten perimeter, the star charts of the Orion Spur were painted in the bold, confident colors of the hegemony, vast swaths of azure and gold that denoted absolute dominion over 300 systems. To High Commander Kren, boundaries were merely suggestions written by the timid and erased by the bold. Standing upon the obsidian command dais of his flagship, the Starpiercer, he looked out across the shimmering holographic projection of the uncharted void ahead. This sector was designated as dead space, an unremarkable ribbon of vacuum floating between two populated arms of the galaxy. No trade routes traversed it. No colonial beacons pulsed within its shadows. According to the Imperial Archives, it was a sterile void, forgotten by the architects of the old galactic wars and left to rot in the cold silence of entropy. "Push the Vanguard forward into Sector 90, Kren ordered, his voice echoing with the casual arrogance of a commander who had never faced a worthy adversary. "Let us see if this barren stretch has any hidden treasures worth annexing for the crown." The fleet of 12 dagger-shaped cruisers glided forward, their ion drives leaving brilliant, serpentine trails of emerald light across the dark. They moved with the effortless grace of apex predators, secure in the knowledge that nothing in this galaxy could withstand the focused fury of Imperial plasma batteries. Yet, as the lead cruiser crossed an invisible, unmapped line in the deep space coordinates, something shifted. It wasn't a visual phenomenon. It was a subtle, mathematical anomaly that registered only on the deepest diagnostic subroutines of the flagship's sensor arrays. A microsecond interruption in the background radiation. A localized distortion of gravitational spacetime, so faint and precise that the automated navigation computers initially dismissed it as a glitch in the stellar drift algorithms. "Commander," the lead telemetry officer muttered, his multifaceted eyes darting across his datapane with sudden, frantic speed. "We are registering a localized energy spike. Origin point is non-existent. There are no celestial bodies within 3 light-years." Kren didn't even turn his head. A fluctuation in a dead sector, probable stellar decay. Maintain course and increase velocity. We do not halt our march for phantom echoes. Had Kren possessed the patience to review the ancient data caches of the pre-collapse era, he might have recognized the signature. He might have known about the perimeter, a silent, unyielding line drawn in the dark during the darkest hours of humanity's forgotten wars, secured by automated sentinel arrays designed to endure long after their creators had turned to dust. The perimeter did not require a crew. It did not broadcast a warning signal, nor did it attempt to negotiate terms of passage. It possessed only a single, absolute directive: identify unauthorized signatures crossing the demarcation line and erase them. Deep within the freezing vacuum of an ice-locked asteroid cluster 3 light-years from the fleet, a massive, dormant core flickered to life. For 5,000 years, the human superdreadnought known as the Vanguard Zero had rested in absolute, unlit silence. Its nuclear fusion reactors, shielded by layers of lead and smart titanium, had idled at a fraction of a percent capacity, waiting in the dark for a war that everyone else had assumed was over. Its hull, 6 kilometers of jagged, charcoal-black armor designed to absorb radar and disperse directed energy, was covered in a thick crust of cosmic dust and frozen methane. When the Imperial cruisers crossed the invisible threshold, the Vanguard Zero's primary cognitive array awoke. There were no alarms sounding in empty halls. There were no panicked voices rushing to battle stations. There was only the cold, mechanical hum of ancient capacitors charging to maximum capacity, drawing power directly from the stellar core around which the dreadnought was anchored. Target acquisition confirmed, a synthetic, emotionless voice whispered through the dormant battle loops of the ship's internal network. Unauthorized foreign signature detected. Pre-collapse security protocol 88 activated. On the bridge of the Star Piercer, the telemetry officer suddenly gasped, his console lighting up with a blinding cascade of crimson warnings. "Commander, sensors are picking up a massive mass displacement. Something has just detached from the asteroid belt behind us. It is massive. It exceeds capital dreadnought classification by a factor of 10. Kren spun around, his expression hardening into a mask of disbelief. "What do you mean something detached? What kind of vessel hides in a dead belt?" "It is not a vessel, sir," the officer choked out, his fingers flying across the keys in a desperate attempt to stabilize the ship's shields. It is a fortress, and it is locking weapons on our vanguard." Before Kren could issue an order to scatter, the silent void erupted. There was no sound in space, but the violent impact of the Vanguard Zero's primary rail batteries translated into a catastrophic shockwave that rippled through the hulls of the Imperial Vanguard. The human dreadnought did not fire elegant, visible beams of plasma or colorful energy bolts. It utilized hypervelocity kinetic penetrators, massive blocks of depleted uranium and tungsten, accelerated to a fraction of the speed of light by linear magnetic rails that spanned the entire length of the 6-kilometer hull. The first kinetic slug struck the lead Imperial cruiser dead center. The impact was instantaneous and absolute. The ship's advanced energy shields, designed to disperse plasma refraction and laser scattering, crumpled like paper against the sheer, brute force mass of 100 tons of metal traveling at 20,000 kilometers per second. The cruiser didn't just explode. It shattered into a million burning fragments of shrapnel and superheated gas, blossoming into a silent, blossoming flower of fire against the blackness of space. Evasive maneuvers, Kren roared, his imperial arrogance instantly replaced by a cold wave of raw, primal panic. "All batteries, return fire, target the anomaly." The remaining 11 cruisers scrambled, their engines flaring as they desperately tried to pivot and bring their heavy forward weapons to bear on the silent giant emerging from the dark. But they were fighting a ghost from an era of total war, a machine built by a species that viewed interstellar conflict not as a game of honor and display, but as an engineering problem to be solved with overwhelming, merciless efficiency. The Vanguard Zero didn't even bother to maneuver. It absorbed the scattered plasma fire of the Imperial fleet against its meter-thick smart titanium armor, the energy diffusing harmlessly across its reactive plating. Then, its secondary missile tubes slid open with deep, hydraulic groans that vibrated through the very fabric of space. Swarms of autonomous strike drones, shaped like jagged arrowheads and guided by decentralized neural networks, poured from the dreadnought's launch bays. They moved with a terrifying, synchronized coordination, ignoring electronic jamming and signal disruption entirely, because they operated on hardwired tactical logic. Within 3 minutes, the Imperial Vanguard was no longer a fleet. It was a debris field. High Commander Kren stood paralyzed on the bridge of the Starpiercer, watching through the reinforced viewport as his flagship's primary navigation screens flickered out one by one, replaced by the grim, statistical readout of total annihilation. The invincible armada of the hegemony, the proud conquerors of 300 systems, had been dismantled in less time than it took to brew morning stimulants. The Starpiercer's communication array hissed, and a single, low-frequency audio transmission broke through the encryption channels. It wasn't a broadcast of victory. It wasn't a demand for surrender. It was simply an automated identification ping, broadcasted in a dead language from a civilization that had vanished millennia ago. Perimeter secure, the synthetic voice echoed coldly through the flagship's dying systems. Trespassers neutralized, resuming standby mode. On the dark horizon of the void, the massive silhouette of the Vanguard Zero began to slow its rotation, its lights dimming one by one as it drifted back into the silent shadow of the asteroid cluster, settling down to wait for the next trespasser foolish enough to forget where the boundaries were drawn. Kren stared into the empty dark, the cold truth finally settling over him like a shroud. Some borders are not drawn on maps to be crossed. They are drawn in blood and iron, waiting in the dark to remind the universe that those who build for the end will always have the final word. The debris of the Imperial Vanguard drifted slowly through the vacuum, a glittering shroud of twisted alloy and frozen atmosphere that caught the distant, indifferent light of dying stars. On the bridge of the Starpiercer, the emergency lighting cast a harsh, crimson glow across the bloodless faces of the surviving crew. The air was thick with the sharp, metallic tang of ozone and scorched wiring. High Commander Kren lowered his hand slowly from the command console. His fingers, usually steady and weighted with the authority of 300 conquered systems, trembled against the cool metal surface. The great, invincible machine of the hegemony had not been defeated by a rival empire or a grand coalition of alien armadas. It had been dismantled by a ghost, a silent, rusted relic left behind by a species that had apparently decided long ago that the universe needed locked doors. "Sir," the telemetry officer whispered, his voice cracking as he stared at a flickering secondary display. "The anomaly, the dreadnought, it has ceased all power signatures. It is drifting back into the accretion shadow of the asteroid belt. It is returning to dormancy." Kren didn't answer immediately. He stared out the reinforced viewport into the absolute blackness of the sector. The giant was gone, hidden once more beneath 50 miles of ice and silicate dust, its terrifying rail batteries powered down, waiting patiently in the dark for another fool to test the line. "They didn't even chase us," Kren muttered, the realization tasting like ash on his tongue. "They didn't consider us a threat worth pursuing. We were merely an administrative error." The insult was more crushing than any defeat in battle. To the hegemony, war was a grand theater of conquest, a display of glorious power and ideological dominance. But to the architects of the perimeter, war was simply a maintenance problem. You identify the hazard, you clear the obstruction, and you return to your quiet. "Set a new course," Kren ordered, his voice dropping into a flat, exhausted register that brooked no argument. "Maximum reverse vector. We are leaving this sector immediately." "And the mission logs, Commander?" the officer asked hesitantly. "What do we report to the High Council regarding the Vanguard?" Kren turned away from the viewport, his eyes hardening with the grim clarity of a survivor who had looked into the abyss and learned the value of silence. "We report that the sector is dead," Kren said, his gaze sweeping across the quiet, broken bridge. "We report that there are no resources here. No colonies. No glory, only a wall, and we pray to every god in the cosmos that the people who built it never decide to take a walk outside their perimeter." The Starpiercer's sublight engines flared to life, a lonely emerald streak cutting through the dark, as the crippled flagship turned tail and fled the unmapped border, leaving the silent sentinel to its eternal watch. Deep in the freezing void, miles beneath the dust and ice, the dormant core of the Vanguard Zero pulsed once, a slow, steady heartbeat in the dark. The perimeter was secure. The line remained unbroken. And the galaxy, for all its noise and ambition, learned a very quiet, very permanent lesson about the cost of forgetting the deep. The return journey of the Starpiercer was a masterclass in quiet terror. We did not speak of the engagement. We did not log the tactical data into the central archives. We simply nursed our crippled hull through the cold, indifferent reaches of the outer rim, driven entirely by the singular, overwhelming desire to put as much distance as humanly possible between our flag and that unmapped, forgotten line in the void. When we finally limped back into the jurisdiction of the inner core worlds, docking at the great orbital spire of Capital Prime, the contrast was sickening. The Imperial yards were a riot of motion and color. Thousands of sleek, silver cruisers drifted through the glittering docks, their hulls polished to a mirror sheen, their broadcast arrays screaming anthems of absolute supremacy into the cosmic ether. Gigantic holographic banners draped across the administrative spires, proclaiming the eternal, unbroken expansion of the hegemony. The citizens walked the promenades with the carefree arrogance of a species that had never once looked into the dark and found something looking back that didn't care about their titles. They were celebrating a victory in a sector 3 parsecs away, blissfully unaware that their entire civilization was living on borrowed time behind a rusted wire fence. High Commander Kren walked down the ramp of the docking bay, his cape dragging slightly against the polished titanium floor. A delegation of junior ministers and intelligence officers was waiting for him, their faces wreathed in eager, obsequious smiles, holding data slates ready to record the glorious details of our new annexation. "High Commander," the Chief Archivist cried out, stepping forward with a flourish. "The High Council has been anxiously awaiting your transmission. The preliminary surveys indicated rich silicate deposits in Sector 90. Tell us, how many new worlds have we added to the ledger? How many resources have been secured for the Crown?" Kren stopped. He looked at the archivist, then at the bright, glittering spires of the capital, and finally out through the enormous observation glass toward the cold, silent depths of the stars beyond the system. "We secured nothing," Kren said, his voice flat, devoid of any theatrical inflection. The archivist blinked, his smile faltering. "I beg your pardon, did the survey encounter logistical delays? Was the asteroid belt unstable?" "The sector is closed," Kren replied, turning his back on the welcoming committee and walking slowly toward the exit. "Closed? By whom? There are no registered sovereign powers within 500 parsecs. Who could possibly?" "A ghost," Kren muttered, his footsteps echoing hollowly against the magnificent flooring. "An old ghost from an old war. And if you have any sense left in that administrative skull of yours, you will burn the maps, erase the coordinates, and pray to every ancestor in our history that the people who built that wall never decide to climb over it." The delegation stood frozen in the pristine hallway, their brilliant smiles melting into uneasy silence as the reality of the deep began to settle over them. Deep out in the silent void, far beyond the reach of the golden spires and the glittering parades, the Vanguard Zero sat in its frozen tomb. Its reactor hummed with a low, imperceptible vibration. The dust settled over its charcoal-black hull. And the perimeter remained, silent, eternal and unbroken, waiting for the next fool to remember that the most dangerous monsters in the universe are the ones who built their walls and went quietly back to sleep. 3 weeks after the Starpiercer limped back into the capital's orbit, the archival records for Sector 90 simply ceased to exist. There was no formal announcement, no public debate, and no emergency session of the High Council. The coordinates were quietly purged from the stellar navigation grids during a routine automated maintenance cycle at midnight. Where a vast, sweeping arc of uncharted void had once invited exploration, the star charts now displayed only a uniform, charcoal-gray void marked with a single, nondescript navigation code: Hazard Class Null. For the vast majority of the hegemony's citizens, it was a minor technical correction, an unremarkable housekeeping detail across an empire spanning hundreds of systems. But among the elite navigational guilds and long-range captains, the sudden creation of a massive dead zone at the edge of imperial space did not go unnoticed. Rumors spread like a silent contagion through the lower decks of the fleet. whispering of an ancient nightmare sleeping in the ice, of a line in the void that swallowed war fleets without emitting a single distress signal. In the deepest subterranean level of the Imperial War College, inside a vault sealed against all wireless transmissions, Commander Kren sat across from Grand Admiral Vane. Vane was a legend of the expansion era, a strategist whose cold calculations had dismantled 3 alien empires over 40 solar cycles. On the holographic display between them floated the raw, unedited telemetry logs extracted from the Starpiercer's damaged black box. "The alloy composition of the hull isn't in our chemical database," Vane said softly, zooming in on the jagged, 6-kilometer silhouette of the Vanguard Zero. "It absorbs sensor pulses by bending the waves around its frame. The kinetic penetrators they used didn't even register as weapons until they were 3 milliseconds from impact." "It fired on automated subroutines, Admiral," Kren said, his voice quiet, devoid of the pride that had once defined him. "There was no crew, no bridge chatter, no tactical hesitation. It didn't launch an attack. It executed a programmed routine like an automated door closing." Vane leaned back in his high-backed chair, his sharp, calculating eyes reflecting the pale blue light of the holotable. "And you are certain there are no life signs?" "If there were humans aboard that vessel, they have been dead for 5,000 years, Kren replied. "The ship is a remnant of their ancient conflict, a silent watchdog left behind when their empire collapsed or moved on. But that is what makes it terrifying, Admiral. If a single abandoned, dusty sentinel can reduce our finest vanguard to scrap in 3 minutes, what was their actual navy capable of?" Vane remained silent for a long time. He looked at the wreckage of the Vanguard, at the sheer, brutal mathematical efficiency of the human engineering. The hegemony had spent centuries building bigger, brighter, and more magnificent ships to flex its imperial pride. Humanity had built for pure, unadulterated survival. "The Council wanted me to court-martial you for retreating," Vane said quietly, deactivating the holographic display and plunging the vault into near darkness. "They wanted to send the Fifth Fleet to reclaim our honor." Kren looked up sharply. "You stopped them." "I showed them the structural stress analysis of your flagship's forward shields," Vane said, a dark, dry humor touching his voice. "I told them that if we send the Fifth Fleet across that line, we won't be starting a war. We will simply be donating 40,000 tons of refined alloy to a 5,000-year-old recycling program." Vane stood up, adjusting his dark gray cloak, and walked toward the vault door. "The sector stays closed, Commander," the Admiral declared, his voice firm and absolute. "We will adjust our expansion vectors outward toward the eastern arm. We will leave the dark behind us." "And if the perimeter expands?" Kren asked. Vane paused at the threshold, his silhouette outlined by the cold light of the corridor outside. He didn't look back. "Then we pray that whoever built it was satisfied with the border they drew." Far away, past the glittering spires of the capital, past the busy trade lanes, and beyond the reach of any Imperial radio frequency, the Vega sector lay in absolute silence. Beneath 50 miles of methane ice, deep within the dark belly of the asteroid belt, the Vanguard Zero rested on its ancient anchors. Its fusion core hummed at a barely perceptible idle, pulsing once every 3 hours, a slow, steady heartbeat in the deep. Inside its primary processing vault, a single green indicator light blinked in the dark. "Sector 90, clear perimeter. Intract, next diagnostic cycle, 1,000 years." The Sentinel went back to sleep. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible stories. Hit the bell icon to stay updated on our latest uploads.